City councilors are expected to take a stand on this year's ballot question about charter school expansion. A resolution about lifting the expansion cap was filed yesterday. We'd like to welcome one of the councilors who filed that measure, the chair of the Education Committee and District Councilor for Roxbury and part of Dorchester, Tito Jackson. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
First of all, we have to educate the viewers and potential voters here. This is a referendum question, so if yes wins, what happens?
There is the potential addition of 12 additional charter schools and or expansions of charter schools statewide in perpetuity, forever. And I think that the biggest issue here is most of the students in the state of Massachusetts actually go to public schools. And this legislation does nothing to add additional funding to any other type of school other than charter schools. So I guess the analogy that I would draw is if you had two children and it was cold outside and one of them had a jacket, would you actually purchase another jacket? Or would you take the jacket from one child and move it over to the other child? That's essentially how the funding formula works. And so that is a huge issue. So in the state of Massachusetts, last year, City of Boston got $215 million from the state. And for about 8,900 students in charter schools, they got $120 million, right? For that. That number will go up to about $158 million. For this year, and in addition, we will pay an additional $15 million to transport those young people. So that's about $175 million. So that only leaves about $40 million for the 57,314 students in the Boston public schools. So the question here is, where is the equity? The people who are proposing this are only choosing to support young people in charter schools when the vast majority of students actually are in public schools. And most of the parents that I know have a child who was in charter school and in a public school, if they have a child in a charter school. So there are many, we actually have to be rooting for every single student in those schools, and never mind what this will do for Catholic schools, which at this point, I believe would be decimated based on these additional unchecked charter school expansion.
We're talking with Boston City Councilor Tito Jackson. We're going to be seeing a lot of simplification around this from both sides. And, you know, I mean, one of the things from the supporters of charter school expansion is that, you know, the more charter schools you have, the fewer students you're going to have in the district public schools. So what's wrong with that?
The issue is simply this. Again, the vast majority so understand, this money shifts and takes money away from public schools and shifts it over to charter schools. So my question is, and I posed it to a couple of parents who came to see me, and they were pro-charter. I said, if this proposal were put before you, and I told you this was going to hurt the best Boston public schools, the highest ranked Boston public schools, would you go forward? And 2 of them out of 3 of them said no. And that's what would happen. This past year, 3,500 young people walked out of school, over $50 million. What we're talking about just next year alone, without any charter school expansion, is $158 million, right? And so the real underlying issue is that we know that Boston public schools need more resources. And those resources, as a state, there's also a equity component, and City of Boston sends a lot of money to the state of Massachusetts. We're not actually getting those resources back to our young people. I also believe this will hurt the current charter schools. Charters over the past 4 years have raised an additional $100 million in philanthropy on top of what they actually spend. I think that pie is going to get sliced up even more. And as I told you before, Catholic schools, I was just at Pope John Paul School. They're doing some great work down there. One of the funders pulled me aside. Someone was giving a couple of $1 million to the school and said, hey, you know what? How do we help save the schools that are in the Catholic school system also? This is unfair, and it actually allows the people at the state house, in particular the governor, to dodge the question of where are the resources that you've taken away from public schools over the past 20 years. To me, this is really about a sidestep of the real underlying issue that we have underfunded public education over the past 20 years, and that's the real sidestep. And now we're picking winners. Because this is only, understand, this only is about charters. So I will be voting no on number 2, and I will advocate at the council with my friend Councilor O'Malley, who's been doing some great work on this also.
Talk about getting together with him to file this.
So, again, Councilor O'Malley and as well as my position is not an anti-charter position, and in fact, I believe that you can be pro-charter and vote no on number 2. This will have, because you know what, people in the city of Boston, we all win or we all lose. And this is about real education for the young people in the city of Boston. And I don't understand. So we're talking about 57,000 students in one side, and we're talking about 9,000 students on the other side. And this proposal only adds additional funding to those 9,000 students. And in fact, where the money comes from is the State House didn't add an additional line item for this. This money would come from the funding that we have for the 57,000 students. So I actually volunteer at Renaissance Charter School. I'm very proud to be a mentor there, and I go there on a regular basis. And I think they're doing some great work there. But we can't say every charter school is better than every public school. That is absolutely not a fair assertion, and we can't say the opposite. So the objective should be additional funding for all, not taking the limited amount of money that the Boston Public Schools gets from the state and shifting it over.
Well, I know there are people who might know that this is a flawed referendum, but they might also feel that, look, there's been attempts to deal with the situation at the State House. People just could not reach an agreement. I mean, they're just sort of desperate.
But the desperation is for quality education. And quality education is not synonymous with charter. There are in fact, in the city of Boston, there is a waiting list that is actually longer for our highest chosen schools than
in the district schools.
In the district schools, than that total 32,000 number. Remember, it was 37,000. Now it's down to 32,000. We care about those parents also. And so at the Linden School in West Roxbury, there's a 100-person waiting list for every single grade. Where are we going to get the dollars to actually expand the size of a Linden school? Where are we going to get the dollars to expand the Nathan Hale School, which is the best public school, and actually, I'm sorry, the best school of any governance structure for Black and Latino boys in the city of Boston, right? Every single one of their fourth graders actually passed the MCAS test. Every single one of them. And I shout out to Sandra Mitchell Woods, who actually just retired at that school. There's no magic bullet. The dupe here is that charters have this mentality. Well, I'm sorry, not charters. Some of the proponents, and there's a subset here because many of my favorite charters actually aren't trying to expand. Many of these folks have this magic bullet mentality that we're going to fix it instantly. Well, look at the Nathan Hale School, level 1 school in the city of Boston. It took some time to change, but they are a level 1 school for a reason, because there's a long-term commitment to education there, and we need more of those, and the Boston Public Schools needs those resources.
We're talking with City Councilor Tito Jackson. Charter schools have gotten a lot of accolades for high test scores, but they've also been criticized for their disciplinary policies and maybe forcing some students out. You've looked into that. What did you find?
I found Up Academy in Boston actually suspended 68 kindergartners last year. That's appalling to have a school that takes your 4-year-old or 5-year-old to school and actually is kicking them out. And I'm sorry, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to apologize. I absolutely find that unacceptable in a public school using public funding to kick kids out and suspend them and steal from them a love for learning, which most of us got when we were in preschool or in kindergarten. And so we do need to look at these disparate rates of suspensions, and then we look at the subgroups high, exponentially higher suspension rates for males of color, as well as special education students. And in fact, one of the schools in the city of Boston that deals with kids who have social emotional issues is in the South End. It's the McKinley School. They have a 14% suspension rate. There are charter schools that have well over a 40%, almost 50% suspension rate. That's unacceptable, because what ends up happening is multiple suspensions in families that are poor means you're going to end up pushing that child out. I can't miss 4 days of work. I don't think you could probably miss 4 days of work. If they're calling you 4 days, that becomes an issue. So we need to deal with that. Not all charters are doing that. There are many schools that actually are dealing with these social emotional issues, but many of them have very disparate aspects in that regard.
I want to ask you about one other financial problem for the schools, in that they're paying for money. That is, the district public schools. They're paying for teachers who didn't make the grade to sort of sit on the sidelines.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I would challenge the assertion that they didn't make the grade.
Well, their administrators didn't want to keep them.
Right, and so the thing is, I think there's a different component. So some of these folks, and one of them was of a former teacher of the year, right, who now was actually in a level 4 school. And so understand, when it's a level 4, we refer to it as a failing school. There's a requirement at the state level, once there's a designation, to excess or get rid of 50% of the teachers there. So that person could have been an exemplary teacher, but the new administrator didn't want them back. I think that we should really look at what type of training is going on for these folks. How do we get them back in the classroom? Because we don't actually have another Chris Lovett who is here. I see your face. We don't want another one, but we don't have someone sit in for you while you do your own, while you go do another job. That makes no sense. And we have duplication of services here that cost us last year $13 million. And it cost us $10 million of money that should actually be going into the classroom. This is a BPS created problem. And so BPS needs to actually own it and actually do what they can do. I'm not saying every single one of these individuals would or should end up back in a classroom, but many of them can, I believe, be reassessed, and actually, if they need help, let's help them, because they came with a commitment to public education and to helping young people, and we should actually deal with that. I would also note that this is actually one of the fields where you're not good at it in their first year. And that's why we don't even give you a long-term contract till after teaching for 3 years. So to have just brand new teachers come in and say that that's quality, and these teachers who are experienced and say that that's not quality, is a huge issue. So I think the Boston Public Schools needs to step their game up in this space and actually deal with and bring solutions to the table for a problem that they've actually brought. And they've claimed that this is around, an issue around diversity. Well, what I've seen in my subcommittee around diversity is that their numbers actually going down in terms of the still state court mandated components.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
City Councilor Tito Jackson. Still to come, we'll talk with a local leader of a national movement for higher pay.